Oh, so yeah. It's like the same thing, but it's different. So I've used it in the past, so it's easy to do. What's your, what did you do for a final? What do you have? Okay. So did you get a degree? You guys do that. Scan this terrible. Did you use like the same stuff? Take that picture. Did you use like the same format from the studies? Yeah, that's what I was doing. I think it changed like I embedded it into video. This is really just this was like one works for tablet, too. I think tablet. I think so. Yes. I took this raffle and I was talking about it. Yeah, I think I actually my parents you should pick it. It's fucking school. My problem is I work during the day, so I just had at night to go out and do during the daytime and the summer. I think we had it too, since we oh yeah. Oh, it's dark. That's what it's like. Can't wait for it to be like sunny out there. Yeah. Like, so.
Is it in the night mode?
My computer should not be in the night mode, but let me check. I turned it off. But I got another setting up here too, though. There we go. That's much better, right? All right, everybody get signed in? Okay, well, this is week number 7. As you can see from the table here in the middle, we're going to be doing some hardware NIC installation tonight after we go over the discussion. And this week is looking at chapter 6 and chapter 6 quiz. And the lab, so we won't forget, if you'll go into 7 lab for me right now and go ahead and put in your name, that would be awesome. We'll submit your name there. Okay, so we're going to look at network hardware. We're going to go up through the NIC installation, the steps of how to do it, different types of NICs that are available. And then I'll have you in teams come to the table and work in teams of 2 or 3 and take the computers apart, take the NIC out, put the NIC back in, and I'll show you how to do that. And then we'll be done. So objectives is looking at different NIC configurations. There's many different types besides just the hardwire type that we have in here, maybe at home, and even Wi-Fi. There's a whole bunch of different other type of NIC installation or NIC types that we'll look at. NIC definition is basically a connectivity device to transmit networking data. So you have a transmit and receive data like we did last week with the cabling. You're going to have a transmit and receive from the computer to the network, from the computer to the switch to the servers to the network. It falls on the physical and data link layer of the OSI model, and it issues data signals. Data signals do have some electricity going through it. It assembles and disassembles data frames, interprets the physical address, like the network address we talked about, IP address, just to name a couple. It also determines right to transmit. NICs are a smart device in that they have built-in network management and buffering for the network that it's on, traffic monitoring as well, and traffic filtering. It does not analyze traffic. It falls upon the layer 3 of the OSI, kind of like your network sniffers do that we cover in PCT110 and in Cisco to determine malware and anomalies on a network. Importance is every network needs a NIC card. Every phone, every tablet, every desktop, laptop, anything that basically uses the network, even your TVs, that has a certain type of NIC card for the networks to work through. So before your different types of NIC cards, before you order a NIC to install on your computer, you need to find out from your manufacturer what type of NIC card your computer can take. Like the ones we're using, these are old school computers, so they have slots that they can we can use to install NIC cards. But a lot of your newer desktops solder the NIC on the actual hard drive or actually on the motherboard. If it fails, then you can sometimes, if the computer has available, the desktop, a slot. Otherwise, you might have to use other alternatives like we'll look at tonight, like a USB to NIC is an example that you can purchase to replace a failed NIC on a computer. So NIC dependencies are access method, network transmission speed, connector interfaces like your category 5 that we did last week, compatible motherboard or device type, and manufacturer. Popular manufacturers of NIC cards are 3Com and Intel, the top 2 manufacturers of NIC cards. It falls on what's called a bus on a on a motherboard. And the bus basically is where the data travels to and from the NIC card to the memory, to the processor. And motherboards use it to transmit data. So everything you do on your computer is transmitted via the bus. And we'll see a picture of one in just a second. On the bus flows such things as memory, processor, hard disk, NIC, your sound, your video, all follows upon the bus of the motherboard. It differs on that bus according to the capacity of the clock speed of that motherboard and specifically the processor chip. And it falls on what's called data path size. And so data path size are, for instance, you might have heard of on OS technology or OS discussion, or you've talked to people at work on different types of computer OSs, whether they can be installed on a 32-bit operating system or 64-bit operating system. Both of those operating systems have different data paths that it falls upon for the data to flow. Expansion slots. When you bust open these computers tonight, you'll see a number of expansion slots in the computers. Some, again, for NIC cards, some for video cards, some for sound cards, scanners, handheld scanners, picture scanners, you name it, game controllers. And inside of the computer circuit board, there's slots that establish electrical connection for the devices to connect on via, we're going to use tonight, which is a NIC card. But again, it could be some of you might have installed video cards in the past, or you installed sound cards in the past. Those are popular that you have to install sometimes. And then device connects to the main circuit board on the bus and goes to the central operating system, which is a processor, the Intel processor, AMD processor. So different bus types. The NIC falls upon what's called a PCI bus, which is a peripheral component interconnect. It falls on a 32 or 64-bit, like I mentioned earlier, the two types of computers available today. Clock speed all the way up to even higher today goes into the 256 megahertz. And then maximum data transfer, again, even getting higher now. This is kind of an older slide, 1 gigabit per second. Introduced by Intel in 92. They were the first folks to create, mass produce for computers. And then officially, the latest official version we use today is 2004, which is 3.0, which we still use in our computers, laptops, tablets, phones, even your smart TVs. So here's a picture of what we're going to be using tonight, an old school NIC card, which these are the types of NIC cards you would purchase if you have a desktop normally. And again, even some of your new desktops today, in fact, majority of your newer desktops today do not have a NIC card of this type. You'll see an example of what ones today look like on motherboards. It was installed or created by standards by the ISA organization, the industry standard architecture, began in the early 80s. And the organization is to support as low as 8-bit all the way up to 16-bit, because that's all that was available in the 80s. And a whopping 4.77 megahertz clock speed, which was about as fast as your Texas Instrument calculator today. It's not real fast compared to today anyway, but back then it was. PCI bus characteristics, it's shorter connection path, meaning faster speeds to the bus, and was available, is available on a PC and Mac compatibility. PCI Express, more modern day type of NIC card. You'll notice at the bottom of the NIC card, the 2 tines available here, which are right here. These 2 tines are something you don't want to touch with your fingers, because the oil on your fingers can saturate those tines. And when you plug in the motherboard, it can fry the motherboard easily. So just be careful of that. Transfer rate, maximum transfer rate on this one as far as clock speed is 133 megahertz. 500 megabits per second path data rate, transfer rate for data flow. PCI Express is the most common modern day for NIC cards, and it does a lot of things like transfer rate control, error reporting, error handling. When it talks bottom bullet about different lanes, That just determined upon the bus of that motherboard how many lanes is available and where those slots are on the motherboard. It can support up to 16 slots, 8 gigabit throughput on a PCI Express for like server type PCI Express NIC cards. So here's an example of a motherboard that literally has evolution of different slots available over the evolution time of motherboards. So you'll see, starting with the top left, the ISA, that's the oldest slot loading. You notice it is the longest slot loading next to the PCI Express times 16. Next came PCI, then PCI Express times 1, then PCI Express times 16, which gives you a higher range of bus speeds. Now, one of the things you'll notice, it's hard to see where you're at, but there's actually slots here and here and here and here. You'll actually have slots corresponding on the NIC card. So you want to make sure when you plug in a NIC card that the slots are turned in the correct fashion. Generally, in this case, it's pretty easy because it has here like a metal lip that goes up here. That's pretty self-explanatory as far as to get into it. But just note that that's why those slots are there. As far as what type of slot the board had, your manufacturing guidelines will tell you. Most networking folks don't read those manufacturing guidelines because most of the cards today, modern NIC cards from modern motherboards, like from 3Com or Intel, are going to work just fine with any motherboard that's out within the last 5 years. Peripheral bus standards. Now we're going to talk about other types of NIC cards. One of the discussions we talked about earlier was when your NIC card fails, what do you do? Okay. Well, here's the ways that NIC cards can be replaced besides just the slot. It's peripheral bus standard. So peripheral means outside of. So a motherboard bus is where these are going to follow. So peripheral devices on a computer will be such as your keyboard, your mouse, your monitor. Very simple installation. Personal Computer Memory Card International Association, or the PCM-CIA, sets standards for external attached cards and connects virtually any external device type. It literally looks about the size of a credit card. You'll see an example in a second. And it's one of the first ones that I used years ago when we converted from old laptops to RJ45 networks. We had to use the PCI cards because the laptops didn't have a NIC card built into them, the generation we had anyway. So it started out in a 16-bit configuration, 8 gigahertz, and this is what it looked like. This was actually a screenshot of what my first NIC card looked like, external NIC card, peripheral NIC card. It was a slot-loaded, plug into the laptop or to the back of a computer. And computers at that time in the late 80s already had slots in there for memory, is what we used them for. So they had cards like this that looked like this, but was used for memory. And so when your computer would max out or your laptop would max out memory, you could buy like 20 megs of memory on a credit card size device. And you're like, 20 meg, that's nothing. Well, back then it was quite a bit. And so, because you're thinking, most of the computers at that time would have maybe 40 megs on the device, and then they'd add another 20 megs here. So, yeah, it was what we had to play with. And so, standards started in the 90s. 32-bit came about after the 16-bit. It matches the same type of speeds as a slot-loaded PCI Express. And the standards, again, have come from the same organizations of standards for network installations. It's a 26-pin interface. Most of the times you would leave the card in the device because those pins could bend easily inside the computer or laptop. And transfer rates for that time and that day was pretty high, 250 megabits per second, or 500 megabits total. And the same transfer rates as a PCI Express card. And that's the sizes, which is roughly around the credit card size configuration. The next is the Express modules. These, the L1 on the bottom, were again originally used for memory modules. Then they converted to NIC installation. What would happen is basically when you plug them in a computer or server, you would tap here, and a module would pop out that the RJ45s would plug into. And again, you just left them in your computer. You didn't, take them in and out because, again, you could bend those tines pretty easily. Then USB is the next one. And I've used quite a few USB to NIC installations over the years, where the motherboard had no more slots possibly, or none available originally. So USB is a good, but everything else works on the computer. So you can buy a USB to NIC card, external, 2 USB standards, 1.1, 2. And that's modern day today. We just came out with about a year ago, 3.0, USB 3.0, with transfer rates up to a gigabit per second. Transfer rate of future, and then this is like about a year and a half, 2 years old. It's supposed to go up to, even now today, up to 6 gig per second, if I'm not mistaken, on USB 3. So that's what it looked like right there. And again, 3Com was a popular vendor for these. D-Link's a popular vendor for these. And it looks just like that. It has a cap on it. You can plug it into USB, and has a little slot there on the right where you plug in your RJ45. You load your drivers on the computer, and you're working. You've got your NIC card working, and network is flowing. Firewire is the next one. I was a graphic designer for years, and so in the graphic design field, we use Firewire a lot for connecting cameras to computers, printers to computers, external hard drives to computers, external CD, DVD drives to computers. And it was, at the time when it came out, the fastest mode of data transfer that you could get was Firewire. And Firewire came out by Apple in the 80s. It was standardized in 95 by IEEE, and 400 megabits per second max, 3 gigabits per second, the latest version in the early 90s. And again, connect to most peripheral devices. And one of the cool things about Firewire is the fact that you could get a 4-pin or 6-pin Firewire. If it's a 6-pin Firewire, you didn't need an external power source for that device. So if you had a 6-pin CD-ROM player or a printer, the power actually was in the cord. So you'd plug it in your laptop to that device, and you wouldn't need to plug in an external power source. And so at that time, that was the only thing, that was the thing to have, basically, because again, it was more portable. You could take any device with you that was external, that was a Firewire 6-pin, and it would run power off of your unit that you were connected to, like a laptop. Firewire, similar to USB and PCMI card, supported most modern day operating system, had the 4-pin and 6-pin, like I already mentioned. The 4-pin or the 6-pin had 2 pins supplying power. And again, I had tons of devices that were like this. So I had a printer, I had a scanner, I had a DVD burner, external drive. And I could take them on the road with me with my Firewire devices and extra batteries from my laptop, and I never had to plug in anywhere. And so, and again, we're talking early 90s. So it was like a big deal to have that. And again, though, the devices to use Firewire was pretty expensive. It was like really expensive. Like an external DVD drive, I remember my work bought for me was something like $850 for an external DVD drive back then. But it was the only one you could get. That was it. I mean, there was no other choices. And so, yeah, they can jack the prices up. But when consumer demand came in and people started buying more, and then USB 3.0 came in, then Firewire kind of went downhill a little bit as far as use case. But in this day, it was the only way to really travel fast and mobile, really, at that time. And again, you choose it, graphic folks, photographers, even programmers that maybe were on the road traveling with with external hard drives and things of that nature. Had a lot of 6-pin Firewire. Here's what a Firewire looks like. And again, it's a special port for the computer. Both laptop, desktops had them. And again, it started out, all Apple devices have it, then PCs began to have them probably in the early 90s, mid 90s. And again, it was the fastest at that time for data transfer, external data transfer. Compact flash is the next one. And again, you're probably thinking compact flash, cameras maybe. Same technology, by the way. It's kind of like modern day-to-day SSD hard drives. It would be the equivalent of when this came out, because up to that point when we wrote data to stuff, it was on read and write disks that had an ARM to read and write, the old-fashioned hard drives. Well, now we had compact flash where you could actually write to really quickly and read from really quickly. But when we still had the slots in the computer available in the desktops, laptops, and so they made it available for Cat5 cable to connect to as well. Very small, pretty good transfer rate, connected to devices that were too small for PCMI slots. Like I can remember, like Apple Newton was a popular one that used it. A IBM Slate tablet when they first came out that was like 20 pounds or something. It's like crazy. So, but it was a tablet. So, think of today as a tablet, but like one of those is a tablet or something compared to what you guys have today. Uses was back then, again, one of the cool uses that came out was wireless connection. So you could plug these into cameras, right? These compact flash devices into cameras, and walk into your office or walk into your house. And if you have Wi-Fi, automatically start transferring your pictures. All you have to do is turn the camera on, and the compact flash will connect to your Wi-Fi and transfer your photos for you. And again, we're talking, mid 90s, late 90s when this was happening. So it's pretty fast for the times, but very expensive too. I think the first compact flash was wireless, something like $450 or something for a little compact flash card, right? And it had hardly any 40 meg or something like that. That's crazy. But again, that's what it looked like. That was a compact, the green device there, which again, up to this came out, it was mainly used for memory and wireless connectivity. But then they just added to it an extension for, and the reason all these devices, especially this one here and the PCMI, was it was actually in between, if you think about it, when hardware had yet to catch up with technology. So when laptops and desktops that didn't have NIC cards, that's when these came in, if that makes sense. So like a 3 or 4 year time frame, because that's about, companies usually, and still today do the same thing, have a 3 or 4 year time cycle on computer turnover. And so we're talking, this hit year 1 after they just purchased, most companies, new computers and desktops and laptops. So they use these in all their devices because they literally just bought new computers. And they weren't going to get rid of them because it was too much money to do that. So for a number of years, 4 to 5 years, I would guesstimate that these PCMI cards, compact flash cards, were very popular because of that. Then modern day, when you guys go buy a laptop today and even desktops, this is what you normally will buy today, is what's called an onboard NIC card. An onboard NIC card, we'll see a picture in a second, is basically just like your mouse or keyboard. It's mounted to the motherboard. And so this is a view sideways of a motherboard. So you got your current ports here for, let's say, your keyboard and your mouse. Well, they just add another port for your Ethernet connection, all right? And it's literally just a size big enough for an Ethernet RJ45 to plug into, and that's it. That's all you need. It's about a 1/2 inch in diameter, and maybe a 1/2 inch high, if that, and plastic, and a little bit of metal, but much cheaper than a full-fledged NIC card. And so that's where these became popular, again, in the early 2000s, when these kind of became popular. mid 2000, probably 2003, 2004, 2005. Advantages: save space. But really, the reason manufacturers did it is money. It saved money. Saved them a lot of money for sure. And it did free expansion slots. So desktops like these that might have at one point got soldered in Ethernet ports still had the slots available if those onboard devices failed. But at a factory, they didn't have them in the computers, if that makes sense. You have to go and buy the NIC card to do it when it failed. So here's the next one, which is wireless NICs. Wireless NICs I've used a number of places. An example was elementary school had which is popular today, still do this. And you might have seen them in your elementary school, had like modular devices parked outside the elementary school for like computer lab or reading lab or whatever, right? Or even libraries possibly. And instead of running Cat5 cable to that mobile, just install these wireless NIC cards, and you can connect it to the Wi-Fi of the school in a much cheaper and quicker fashion. And so this advantage over wired bounds, it's more expensive, but really not that much more anymore. These NIC cards here, like this Netgear, about 45, 50 bucks. 45, 50 bucks, and a regular NIC card about 30 bucks. So it's not that much more expensive. So we're talking 15 bucks more. So it's really not that bad. And they work easily to install. And bandwidth is going to be much lower for sure because it's wireless, but still it works for what use cases and schools and businesses use them for. It works fine. I've even had students and associates in business use these for and buildings that they just added on quickly and install the wireless NICs, and it's fine because the businesses are functioning in office format. So literally you just need to connect to email, a little bit of internet, and connect to the network. That's it. That's all they need. So they're not like gaming first-person shooter games, all day long and downloading movies. And so they're just literally doing normal functions on a network, and it works just fine. So when you're installing a NIC card, what we're ready to do in just a moment is, and by the way, our lab's going to be, and our time's going to be a lot shorter tonight. So hope you're thankful for that. But by the way, you guys did great last week. And now a number of you created not only your crossover, some of you created a straight too. So kudos for hanging out to your group was done. That's great. So first is installing hardware. When you're installing hardware on a NIC card, using a NIC card, basically a couple safety things I'll mention. You can purchase ground cables, which I don't use, never have used. If you go to Best Buy, actually, you see them on their tables. I have these ground cables and strap them. Anyway, but the case mods here are designed to where you can take your hands and just rub on the case mods, and they'll take your static electricity out of your hands. And some of us have more static electricity than others. I think I have more than others, maybe. I don't know why. But you definitely don't want to like rub your feet on the floor. You don't want to rub your feet on the carpet and then bust open the case. So basically the deal is you unplug your device, unplug your computer, let it sit for 30 minutes. When I mean unplug it, not just the power, but any peripheral devices connected to a printer, your Cat5 cables, your power to your speakers, whatever, keyboard, mouse, everything. Unplug it, let it set. Because what's going to happen is the power supply that's in these devices will dissipate into the table wherever it's sitting at. It will dissipate that energy will. And then within 30 minutes, you're able to then bust the case open and get to the NIC card, take it out, and install a new NIC card. Just a note about NIC cards, it comes in like a foil-based kind of material. Keep it in the box or wherever it comes in. A lot of times you just put it in the envelope, not in the box anymore. Keep it in the box or envelope until you're ready to install it. So there's no need to take it out, right? Because the more you take it out of it, the more it's exposed to air, the more it's exposed to you getting the oil on your fingers on the NIC card. You don't want that. Last thing is about the oil on your fingers. Make sure on the bottom tines of that NIC card, you also don't touch those. And I have tried them before doing that. Just having just all 30 NIC card or something, and and getting, in a hot room and just, sweat and whatever, you trip, just fly NIC card. So just be careful on that. And so they're very old school devices. You'll see in a second. Okay. Most modern computers, you don't even need a screwdriver to get into them, right? You literally have levers you pop open and you get right into the NIC card in no time. These you will have to use some, maybe a flathead or a Phillips to get into it. Then once you get into the NIC itself, there'll be a couple screws to unscrew. Some of these computers will have 2 NIC cards. You'll decide in the group which one you want to do. You only have to do one. And when you unseat that NIC card, I always tell students to get the computer up as close as you can to yourself. If you unseat it, it's not too bad. But when you're trying to seat that NIC card, you'll make sure you go right over the top of it. That way, when you put it into the slot that it needs to go into, and you kind of rock it in there, you can get down level with the NIC card to make sure on both sides of it you don't see any metal tines showing, because that means it's not seated well. And one of the number one reasons why NIC cards don't work after you install it is they're not seated well. So you know. So if you ever do install a NIC card, it doesn't work, doesn't recognize it, more than likely 9 times out of 10 it's not seated well. Do NIC cards, are they lemons like from the store? Yeah, I've got a number of them like that. If you ever have to order a NIC card, I would recommend, if you can, say if you have time to do it, order from like Newegg. That way you can get their return policy is such that they will literally send you a new one before the old one's even sent back. And so Newegg is really good about that. And then I would even recommend them over any face-to-face store like Best Buy or Walmart. Again, because the return policy is it's even better than Best Buy, for sure. Once you get up on Best Buy, it's not that great, Best Buy. But anyway, Newegg, if you can wait a day or two, which will literally sometimes the next day they can get it to you, or most 2 days, that's what I recommend. Okay, so we're going to go over a few more slides, and I'm going to let you guys go at it. But confirm now, a couple of these things I'll just say honestly. Firmware, never mess with it. Do not ever mess with firmware on a NIC card. You don't need to. Now, did I ever have to mess with firmware in the early 90s? Yeah, definitely I did, because it's the early 90s and the NIC cards hadn't been out that long, and the devices were literally changing so fast, computers were coming out so fast that they literally had to change firmware sometimes 2-3 times a year on some of these popular NICs. But again, that's not the case today. I mean, if anything, facts are the sales for devices that use NIC cards that we're going to use tonight are like going down really fast. What's going up is your mobile devices, right? They don't use a NIC card like we're using tonight. They do have an onboard NIC, but you're never going to replace that. You're going to have the company replace it or get rid of it and buy a new one, right? So the onboard NICs or the NIC installation we're going to do tonight, firmware you never have to mess with. So I'm just skip that. Just don't do it. Where it talks about EEPROM, this is called electrical erasable programmable memory. This is what actually is used on the NIC card to update its firmware. Again, never have to worry about that. Not in today's time anyway. You don't have to. Remanufacturer's documentation. I'll just be honest with you. Most networking guys, including myself, do not do that. All right. The book's going to tell you to do that, but in the real world, and when you're working in the real world with doing this all day, you don't do that. You really don't. And it's mostly common sense stuff you'll see tonight. So when you're installing the NIC, just verify you got some tools. And if it's a modern computer, you really don't need any tools. But these old school computers, you will need some tools. And so, and the tools are very simple. I mean, the tool set you can purchase that you need for PCs today, you can buy at Walgreens for $10. Seriously. And that's enough tools for everything you might need for computers today. Unplug it, already talked about that. Let it sit for 30 minutes. Ground yourself. I don't do that. And again, most shops don't anymore. But if you're careful, you're fine. If you're not careful, yeah, buy a ground strap, and it'll help you. When you're opening a computer case, select which slot the NIC card's in, unscrew the screws, take the NIC out, put the new NIC back in, attach the brackets, verify cables. You generally don't have to do that anymore. You're like, cables, what's that mean? again, when NICs first came out, on the actual NIC card, there's actually wires that ran from the NIC card sometimes to like a sound card or to a CD drive, right? They would have connectivity like that in weird places for whatever reason. I don't remember. But I do remember doing that. I do remember having connectivity devices, connectivity wires and cables from a NIC card. Generally, it was to like a some type of read device, so like a CD drive or a sound drive. But normally it was like a CD drive of some type. Anyway, you generally have to worry about that today. In fact, 99.9% of the time, you're not going to have to worry about that today on modern day NICs. I would even probably be safe to say 100% of the time within the modern day NICs. Within the last 5 years, you don't have to worry about that. Now, would you ever come against this at a workplace? Yeah. If you have an old computer that's have an old NIC, you might come, but you can replace it with a newer NIC that doesn't need that, probably. After you're through, replace the cover, turn on the computer, and make sure the NIC software is configured. Now, let's talk about that real quick. Software. Most of your software for NIC are already on the OS. So when you put the NIC into the computer and start it up, it's going to note it's going to have all the modern NIC drivers in that OS. So we'll say Windows 10, right? Which is most popular. It'll have all the Intel, all the 3Com drivers needed for all modern NICs. Okay. Generally, you don't even need a driver, and a lot of them don't even supply CDs anymore because most computers don't even have CDs to use anymore, right? But back in the day, you used to have like these dudes, slot drive CDs, or these even have floppy drives, which maybe some of you have never seen before. It's CD drive. You would have to put in this floppy drive or the CD, whichever the driver was, in that drive before you shut the computer down. That way, when you put the new NIC card in and it started up, Windows, and still does the same thing, by the way, Windows will still do this. It'll search for external drives first for drivers, then it searches for the hard drive, right? Today, it would search for USB, right? It would search for your hard drive second, and again, it's going to find it most likely on that hard drive. So, but back in the day, we used to have, for these computers here, I remember each semester reinstalling the NIC drivers and having a floppy disk, one floppy disk separate for each computer, and each floppy disk was configured differently. Each floppy disk had, because each computer had a different NIC card. It was crazy. But those days are gone. You don't have to worry about that. So manufacturing, as far as installation goes, you'll note on this here, it's a good picture. You don't see any of the metal tines showing. That's one you got to be aware of on both sides. So this side and the other side, make sure they're not showing. It's kind of a goldish color. You can tell pretty quick if it is. Already talked about this. If you ever do come across one of these, which you might in an old workplace or something, just never remove the card. Leave it in there. Just leave it in there. And they still do work. These are like 10/100 speed, though. They're very slow. But you might come across some, or you might decide to buy one day just to play around with it. I don't know. Just leave the card in there. This is showing a picture of somebody moving it out. No, don't do that. Just leave it seated, because there's no reason to remove it, really, unless you're going to put something else in there all the time, which normally you're not. It's just used for that one feature, which in this case is to connect to an Ethernet connection. Modern operating systems, already talked about that. For PCMI, you don't need to restart. Even for NIC installations, a lot of times through USB, you don't need to restart. Device drivers, TCP/IP suite, which installs by default on NIC cards. You will need also the print services of networking print services, and file services and networking services to be able to connect to a network and log in. And most drivers, like I said earlier, are already installed on the operating system. And one reason for that is, again, most computers today don't. How many of you at home do not even have CD drives anymore on your home computers? All right, there's a number of you. And again, it's going to become more popular for sure. Any new computers, all new computers aren't coming out with it. So here's what it looks like, by the way. If, say, for instance, your computer couldn't find the drivers, it would prompt something like this. Hey, where are they at? The problem with this picture is if you're installing a NIC card, you have no internet access. And so you're going to have it somewhere, whether it be on a USB or whether it be on a CD or somewhere. It's going to have to be dumped on to get done. All right, so that's all I'm going to talk about on that. I'm going to switch to the NIC installation. So instead of printing this out and wasting paper, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go over this NIC installation PDF that's inside of week 7. And I have it on the overhead. You don't have to bring yours up if you don't want, but if you want, you can. So in this lab, you're getting ready to configure a NIC with a PC. Take your time, be careful, don't hesitate to ask for assistance. We'll groups of 2 or 3 or 4. And part 1, everybody's going to do, you're going to remove the NIC, everybody in your group. So the first person will be the person that busts the case open, unscrews the screws for the NIC, decides which one you're going to do first as a group, get the computer up next to you, close to you, then remove the NIC card after you remove the case. Then that same person, that first person, will install the NIC card, but you don't have to screw the screws back in, okay, the first person. Second person, take the NIC out, put the NIC in, but don't put the screws in. So whoever the last person is in your group will, well, after they've seated the NIC card well, I want everybody to kind of make sure it's seated well in your group. Then that last person will screw in the screws for the NIC, put the case mod back on, and then over on this black rolly case over here, you'll put your case mod there. If you do have a screwdriver that some of you might need, that should be around your table, and you can borrow some. Some of them are worse than others. So installing the NIC, I already talked about that. Won't go over that again. The following tasks will not be done in class. We will not install this actually to a computer and set them up with a keyboard, mouse, and monitor. But if you were to do it at home, it would go through these processes. And I want to go over these because we're going to talk about it at the very end. So when you add a proper NIC card properly to your computer, a couple protocols need to be added. One is a Microsoft protocol for TCP/IP, which is mentioned there under protocol. In fact, that's the only protocol needed. But without that, you can't connect to the network. You have to have TCP/IP installed. Next is a client. The client, in this case, is Microsoft Client for Networks, to be able to log into a network, right? Services, file and print services. If you don't install that one for Microsoft Networks, you can't share files. You can't get files from other people on the network as well. So those 4 are needed. Again, protocol, TCP/IP, client, Microsoft Client for Networks, and then services are the file and print services. And I mentioned in here, again, you might come against it someday in your workplace. If Windows doesn't have the drive that will prompt you for the CD or somewhere on the hard drive. And then you would shut down the computer, install, and we're going to go over these questions at the end. So I will black the screen for that. And we'll come back to those at the very end. I'll let you look at them for just a second, but then we'll black them there on the end. Boom, or no. Blank. There you go. Okay, so let's see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay, so let's do this. We'll have U3, this one, U2, this one here, U3, that one there, and then U3, that one there. On the end. All right, so go forth and conquer. If you need help, let me know. Take your time. You're not going to hurt these, by the way. So just take your time. They might be a little dusty too, by the way. So you know.
You want us to do it up here? Can we take it back?
Let's do it now. Yeah, you can take it back to your desk if you want to. You don't have to keep it on the table. You can definitely take it back to your desk if you want to. Just kind of move everything out of the way. That's fine. Or you can keep it on the table. However you want to do it. Whatever's easy for you guys. And make sure and lay your case mod down after you bust it open. Lay it down where the NIC card is facing up and the computer is laying down flat.
down now?
Yeah, go and lay it down flat. Here, go and lay this computer down flat. This. There we go. Perfect. Yeah, go ahead. There you go. Cool. I guess some of your computers will have two NICs. You just decide the grip which one you're going to use. That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think remove, put back, right?
Do what up?
We just remove it. And
Yeah, remove it and install it. Well, each person will, and the last person will put the screw back. And then just after each person seats it, just make sure you kind of double check. The times on showing on both sides. So after each person takes the NIC out and installs it, make sure your group kind of checks that the metal timings aren't showing. And the last person that is in your group, you put the screw back in, case mod back on, and put it on that black rolly part over there.
Put it in that way.
Oh, other side.
I think the other side has like.
I'll do over here, guys.
Oh
yeah, it'll tell you the date. If you guys won't look at the date on the NIC card, it'll tell you the date of the manufacturer.
The other one doesn't have to because we got the connection to the. Could be that. Probably.
Assembly 03 2001.
Should be. Pull this in. I'm tapping out.
This one to play with. And that's actually got the coaxial and the RJ45.
So we take it out.
I know how you guys put that one on the bottom of this film.
Yeah.
Yes.
Grab both sides of this like this. Grab both sides and lock it up. Oh, you're doing it?
Yeah.
You're putting it in? Gotcha.
Proper the magnet.
Looking at graphics cards right now.
What now? Oh, yeah, yeah. That's all right.
Is there any other screen here?
That you're not using it for.
You might just need like.
Yeah, but then.
Right.
Well, for 1080, 6 or 8 years, you're looking at about $600-700. But if you look like it, raise the price what it's going for.
You can get them straight from here right now.
Yeah.
For MSRP.
Yeah.
Yeah, or some of the manufacturers like EVG or like buy them.
But
So I would just wait. You can't just wait 2 months because in April, the new that should theoretically drop some prices.
that's what I'm waiting for, because I've been on like video wait lists, so they can be going to do it. They have them in stock for like ages now. I did get one notice one time, but I was at work. By the time I got home, they were already out.
I kept waiting for the market to crash.
That's what I'm waiting to. Either.
Well, I mean, it has gone a lot, but people still aren't giving them up yet. So I'm just waiting for all the miners to be like, I gotta sell my stuff.
Yeah.
So
or at least stop buying them. I don't know if I use one, but.
We were just trying to get the NIC card back in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Stuck.
Yeah, like on for 5 months in a row.
Is it getting stuck on the other side?
No.
Yeah, there's a slot where that metal thing fits in on the end.
I think one of them has to go.
There you go. That sounds good.
I don't think you were really too junk to it, but you want to break it.
No, you're not gonna break it. I mean, you can break it. I'm not saying you can't say it. Yeah, you could
Take it out
break
the
it.
back end. We'll
Rephrase that. Yeah, over there on the kit, if you guys can put yours on the top of the black. Actually, do me a favor, put that on, you can put it on the bottom right here. Thank you. Good job, good job. And we'll go over these questions together in just a moment. You can look at them though. If your team's done, you can look at these questions. It's what we went over on the prior pages. We'll just kind of go over together. Kind of come up in your head what the answers are, what you think the answers are. And again, it's the prior pages we just went over on that PDF. There you go. You can just put them at the very top. That'd be perfect. Yeah, thanks. Awesome. On that screwdriver, if you get in that that bright blue, yeah, and I think it's the second shelf down or third shelf down. There's a little pail on the right, very right. Yeah, that box right there. You store them right in there. Perfect. Thanks. Okay, so first question was, or is, what protocols need to be installed for TCP/IP to work? Remember, it could be a little tricky on this one.
TCP/IP?
Exactly. Yay, you got it. What's the difference between a patch and crossover cable? In your own words, what's the difference? Just if you're somebody who's asked, what's the difference? There's a lot of different answers too, by the way. It's not just one correct answer. So if somebody's asked what the difference between a patch and crossover is, remember we created the crossover last week that, you don't need the hub in between computers to talk. That's one. But what's some other things about the difference between a patch and crossover?
What's a
Anybody?
patch cable?
What?
Patch cable. I don't know what a patch
Straight cable, just like you have on,
Straight, okay.
yep. Mhm. Where the two, you got the A and B, 568 A and B wires are different on both ends. And it needs the switch or hub to communicate between computers.
The inputs and output wires are
Switched on the crossover.
So that
Yep.
two computers can talk.
Correct.
And then a straight cable, they're just the other way. I don't know.
Well, the straight cable basically is used for normal. You could say normal networks, and the crossover for peer-to-peer. That's a pretty simple example or answer that you can get people. Now, what type of network? And I already gave you the answer on that. What kind of network uses a patch cable? Anybody? You're like, you got an answer? Regular network could be a star wired bus, whatever. Crossover cable. If you were listening. Peer-to-peer. There you go. And then if your NIC card, we talked about this a little bit before we started the lab. I gave you a couple examples. If your NIC card does not work, what could be the cause? Not seated well was one. What's another one? And we talked about this in the reading of some of the requirements needed for NIC to work. And some of the answers are already up here. What was it?
Maybe the drivers.
Yeah, the drivers. What else? Somebody say protocol? Somebody said protocols. Protocols is one as well. They're not installed. File and print services, networking, Microsoft networking. And then how would you troubleshoot it? Like, for instance, on the seating thing, how would you troubleshoot that? What would you do to fix that?
Take it out, put it back in.
There you go. Open the case and seat it well. Take it out, put it back in. What about if, say, TCP/IP is not installed? What would you do there? Install it. There you go. Pretty simple, right? And so, quick quiz. You don't have to write it out. We just wanted to go over it. Make sure you submitted your name before you go tonight, and do me a favor, turn off your computer and the computer is next to you, and we are done. Great job.